In the heart of Rome, where power meant everything and trust meant nothing, a foreign queen dared to ensnare the most powerful man alive. Cleopatra, the young ruler of Egypt, and Julius Caesar, the man who held the fate of the Republic in his hands. Was it love, or was it the most dangerous political gamble in history? This affair didn't just break hearts, it shook the very foundations of Rome. And before it was over, it would leave a trail of betrayal, blood, and whispers of a monarchy rising in the shadows. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover is not just the scandal of two lovers, but the hidden spark that ignited the death of the Roman Republic itself. Rome in 48 BCE stood at a strange crossroads. The Republic had stretched its power across continents, swallowing kingdoms, silencing rivals, and proclaiming itself eternal. And yet, inside its marble walls, the Republic was tearing itself apart. Civil wars raged like wildfires. Senators whispered treason in dim corridors. Blood had been spilled on the Senate floor before, and it would be spilled again. At the center of this storm was Julius Caesar, general, dictator, visionary, tyrant. To some, he was Rome's savior. To others, he was the greatest threat the Republic had ever faced. Far from Rome, another kingdom teetered on the edge of ruin. Egypt, the jewel of the Nile, was fractured. The Ptolemaic dynasty, heirs of Alexander the Great's generals, had ruled for centuries, but time had rotted their empire. Corruption festered, family members plotted against one another, and the throne itself was soaked in intrigue. At just 21, Cleopatra VII had already tasted exile, forced out by her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who clutched the crown with trembling hands and ruthless advisors at his side. But Cleopatra was not born to vanish. She was sharp, calculating, and more dangerous than any army her brother could raise. She understood a truth that most rulers overlooked. Armies could be defeated, empires could crumble, but influence, true influence, was sharper than steel and longer lasting than any sword. When Caesar's legions marched into Alexandria, Cleopatra recognized her moment. Her exile had given her hunger, and hunger sharpened her resolve. If she could reach him, if she could win him, her throne would be restored. But there was one problem. How does a young, hunted queen slip past palace guards, through enemy halls, and into the private chambers of the most powerful man alive? The answer would become legend. The story goes that Cleopatra entered history's stage not with an army, but with a gamble of audacity. Smuggled through the corridors of the royal palace in Alexandria, she arrived rolled inside a rug, or perhaps hidden within a linen sack, delivered as if she were nothing more than merchandise. When the bundle was unfurled in Julius Caesar's private chambers, what spilled out was not fabric, but a queen. A queen whose presence would alter the fate of Rome itself. There she stood, Cleopatra VII, exiled ruler of Egypt, 21 years old. Not timid, not desperate, but radiant with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. She embodied Egypt, mysterious, ancient, and irresistible. Caesar, 52 and hardened by decades of war and betrayal, found himself face to face with a woman unlike any he had encountered before. Their meeting was not born of romance, it was strategy. Cleopatra needed Caesar's legions to reclaim her throne from her treacherous brother. Caesar, ever the tactician, saw in Egypt more than a queen in distress. He saw wealth, he saw grain, he saw a land that could secure his political future back in Rome. And yet, there was something else. Whispers would later spread through the marble halls of Rome that even Caesar, cold, calculating, a man who trusted no one, was not immune to her spell. It was not merely beauty that disarmed him, but her wit, her intelligence, her presence. Cleopatra was power wrapped in silk, and Caesar knew it. By the time dawn broke over Alexandria, the two were no longer strangers. They were allies, they were partners, they were something more. But passion in politics is never safe. What began as alliance and desire soon spiraled into a storm of war and blood. Cleopatra's return to power came drenched in blood. With Caesar's legions backing her claim, the Egyptian civil war erupted. The young queen stood beside Caesar as her brother's forces fought desperately to drive them out. The Nile ran red. Ships burned in the harbor of Alexandria. And when the dust settled, Ptolemy XIII lay dead, drowned while fleeing the battle. Cleopatra was queen again, her throne secured by Rome's greatest general. But this alliance was not merely written in treaties, it was carved into their bodies. Cleopatra soon bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, the living symbol of their union. Yet what was whispered in Alexandria as destiny was seen in Rome as danger. For the Romans, Caesar was already accused of seeking kingship. And now here was proof: a foreign queen in his bed and a child who could one day claim both Egypt and Rome. And so, when Cleopatra dared to cross the sea and step foot in Rome itself, the scandal would explode into something far greater. When Cleopatra entered Rome in 46 BCE, she did not bow her head or play the part of a guest. She came as a sovereign. She came as a queen. Draped in silks, accompanied by attendants and guards, she arrived not as a lover in secrecy, but as a ruler in her own right. Her son, Caesarion, the child she claimed as Caesar's heir, nestled at her side. Caesar placed her in one of his villas across the Tiber River, not hidden away, but in plain sight. To the Romans, this was shocking, even scandalous. Their republic prided itself on austerity, on self-control, on contempt for kings and queens. And here was Julius Caesar, openly entertaining a foreign monarch, treating her as though she belonged among Rome's nobility. But Caesar went further. He ordered statues of Cleopatra erected in the newly built temple of Venus Genitrix, the goddess from whom Caesar claimed descent. To honor Cleopatra, there was no simple gesture. It was a declaration. In marble and stone, Caesar tied her image to Rome's divine heritage. To his enemies, this was the final insult. Cleopatra was not a queen. They saw her as a dangerous symbol of Eastern decadence, a corrupting force threatening the soul of the Republic. Worse still, she represented proof of what many had long suspected. Caesar was no longer serving Rome. He was serving himself, his ambition, his dynasty. And behind the polished marble walls of the Senate, whispers grew sharper. The knives of jealousy and fear were being honed in secret. Every gesture Caesar made toward Cleopatra convinced his rivals that Rome itself was being betrayed. Before we continue, if stories like this fascinate you, like this video and subscribe. We dive into the betrayals, scandals, and secrets that shaped empires. And what comes next will reveal how Cleopatra's presence in Rome set the stage for Caesar's murder. Because while Caesar basked in her company, his enemies sharpened their knives. The senators of Rome had watched Caesar's rise with unease for years. They tolerated his power, his sweeping reforms, even his audacious claim of dictatorship for life. But Cleopatra's presence in Rome was different. To them, she was the living embodiment of Caesar's ultimate ambition. A queen by his side, a son who bore his blood, and whispers of kingship in a republic built on hatred for kings. Rome despised monarchy. The word itself was poison, a reminder of tyranny long overthrown. To many senators, Caesar's affair with Cleopatra was not romance. It was treason in disguise. They believed he dreamed not of serving the republic, but of ruling over it as a king, with Caesarion, his foreign-born son, waiting in the wings. So they conspired. In darkened chambers, men who had once called Caesar friends sharpened their blades. They told themselves they were saving the republic. Perhaps some even believed it. And so, on the Ides of March 44 BCE, Julius Caesar walked into the theater of Pompey. He believed he was attending a meeting of the Senate. He believed he was still in control. He did not know he was walking into a trap. The attack came swiftly. Steel flashed. Cloaks flew. One by one, the blades struck. Caesar fell, bleeding out beneath the gaze of men who claimed to love Rome. His lifeblood spread across the floor, staining the republic with the murder of its greatest leader. When word reached Cleopatra, terror gripped her. She understood instantly what it meant. Without Caesar, she was no honored guest, no queen at Rome's side. She was prey, and so she fled with her son, Caesarion, back to Egypt, before the Senate could decide her fate. But Caesar's death was not her end. It was only the beginning of a deadlier game, one that would bind her to Mark Antony and plunge Rome into its final war. The Ides of March silenced Julius Caesar, but it did not silence the questions he left behind, questions that would haunt Rome for generations. Did Caesar truly love Cleopatra, or was she only a pawn in his grand design? Did he ever intend to recognize Caesarion, their son, as his heir? Or was the child simply another piece in the endless chess game of power that Caesar played so well? Rome would never know. For Cleopatra, The dream of ruling beside him ended the moment his blood stained the Senate floor. Yet she did not give up. She returned to Egypt carrying more than grief. She carried Caesarion. To her people, she proclaimed him not merely her son, but the son of Caesar, the living bridge between Egypt and Rome. In him, Cleopatra sought to preserve not just her dynasty, but the legacy of a man who had dared to reshape the republic. But in Rome, another heir had already been named. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, claimed the mantle of Caesar's legacy. Cold, ruthless, and patient, Octavian understood something dangerous. Legitimacy was power, and Caesarion threatened his. The boy's very existence undermined his claim. If Caesarion was accepted as Caesar's true blood, Octavian's future crumbled. To Octavian, there could be no compromise. Caesarion was not a child, he was a rival, and rivals had to be destroyed. The stage was set for the final act. Cleopatra would soon find herself in another storm, bound not to Caesar, but to Mark Antony, a man whose fate was as entwined with hers as Caesar's had once been. Together, they would challenge Octavian in a war that would decide the survival of dynasties and the fate of empires. But that is another story, one filled with passion, betrayal, and ruin. In the end, the affair between Cleopatra and Caesar was not just a romance. It was a spark that lit fires across Rome, fires that would burn away the Republic and forge an empire in its ashes. Was it love, or was it ambition? Perhaps it was both. But one truth endures. When Cleopatra stepped into Caesar's world, she altered the fate of Rome forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the scandals and betrayals that history tried to hide. And if you want to know what happened when Cleopatra met Mark Antony, the love that defied an empire, click the video now appearing on your screen.